Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. The last couple of months here at Submission Audio have been absolutely crazy. The general response is that you guys have been loving Flatline, and as a result, it's been featured on a number of awesome albums and video game soundtracks already. Because we're not the types to rest on our laurels, for the last couple of months behind the scenes we've been quietly working on a couple of projects, chief of which has been our first major update to Flatline, version 1.1. Version 1.1 is a completely free update to all owners of Flatline, which includes DC offset filtering, dithering, auto gain, delta monitoring, safe clip, and up to 128 times oversampling. Yes, you heard right, 128 times. We took stock of all the things that you guys wanted to see in the plugin, and now they're in there. So let's try the new features out on a song I recently mastered for my friends in Northlane. Okay, in case you haven't heard the song before, here we go. You're welcome. Alright, so typical new Northlane trance metal banger. Let's get into Flatline. So, the first thing you'll notice is that the UI has been slightly redesigned, slight cosmetic facelift for us. So, we've generally done this just to make room for future features that we want to add and to kind of create a template for future plugins we want to create as well. So, one of the things that you can now do is basically enable or disable the appearance of these various readouts in the histogram and the viewfinder, amongst other things which we'll get into later. So, let's actually start by dialing in the plugin and then we'll go over the new features. So, I want to go to the part where the drums kick in. Before we do that, we want to disable the auto gain in this instance. You won't want to do this when you're mastering with Flatline. I'm doing it simply so that you can hear the effect of the clipping without being fooled by the increase in loudness. So we'll go with this and set the threshold. Alright, you can see that I was fine-tuning it using the Shift modifier key. I tend to do all my dialing within the 0.01 dB realm of fine-tuning. So around about -8.32 is really good for this song. The snare clamp tends to generally go from about -3 dB to maybe -6 to -7 dB, which is around about perfect for a good mix when it's being hit with clipping. Now, you want to stop just shy of where you start to clamp down on steady state signals like guitars, because you're going to have a lot of problems if you get down into that, a lot of crackle city going on. So from here on out, we move on to dialing the shape control. Around about 97 is pretty good for this song. So shape, as it gets softer and softer, the onset of clipping gets lower and lower and lower, and you start getting a progressive saturation type effect, also a dulling type effect. I don't like to have shape too low for mastering. Generally, I tend to hover anywhere between 95 and 100. Sometimes we go down to the low 90s, but really depends what it is that you're mastering. If it was cool jazz, maybe it would be in the 80s or lower. So let's actually delve into some of the new features that have come with Flatline. One of the easiest to check out will be the delta, which shows you what's actually being clipped by the clipper. This isn't going to sound good, so be ready for it. Right, just the transients. So the delta is really cool if maybe your ear isn't fully developed at this point. You want to hear what you're actually clipping away from the signal, and you want to make sure that it's no steady state signals. It lets you hear the crackling far more easily. So that is the delta. We've already explored the auto gain. Let's move on to the DC offset filter. So the DC offset filter is something that's more of a safety net. It's designed in case you have waveform offset from the 0 point, so it might be higher or it might be lower, maybe you have more refactions, maybe you have more compressions. This is something that used to happen due to assorted electrical issues in the analog realm. It's less of a problem with digital mixing, but we have it included just in case. This tends to be a bit of a safety net in case you've done everything you can think of, but you still can't get your mix as loud as you want. DC offset tends to deal with the lowest subharmonic frequencies and creates a little bit extra headroom for you in the mix. So I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear this through the YouTube compression, but I'll play it for you all the same. very subtle effect working on the subharmonic frequencies. The next one, very, very ubiquitous with mastering, you've got dither. Turns dither on and off. We've got bitrate all the way from 16 up to 24. We default to 16 because generally if you're dithering because you intend for the song or the album to go to CD, and that's why we essentially have dither in the modern era. I would recommend defaulting this to on if Flatline is the final plugin in your mastering chain, just in case somebody decides to crunch your song down to 16-bit, which some services still habitually do. And now we have the granddaddy, the oversampling. From our previous maximum of 4 times, now all the way up to 128 times. So as you can see, we've included some very handy tooltips here for you. Speaking realistically, the vast majority of audible aliasing, if not all of it, is going to be eliminated by the time you get to 32 times. 64 times ensures that it's all underneath the noise floor, even at the very, very high frequencies. So you might wonder, why did we include 128 times oversampling? Well, as you can see in the tooltip here, it's completely pointless, but it looks really, really good on the meters for all of you meter warriors out there on forums and YouTube and assorted platforms that like to dial things in more with visuals rather than your ears. For the rest of us, let's go back to 32 times and try some stuff out. So what you probably notice is that this save clip button actually appeared the moment I flicked oversampling on. So if I turn it off, it disappears. If I turn any level of oversampling on, save clip suddenly appears. Now this is really, really handy because what tends to happen when you oversample audio and then clip it is that you regenerate some of those faux peaks that you create with clipping. So to those who aren't familiar with why we tend to use clipping for mastering, it's because it tends to chop the top off peaks. And because it just does a hard cut, which ends up being a square wave, square waves, for reasons we won't explore in this video, cannot exist in the analog realm. So that the moment it comes to the digital to analog converter to actually recreate that waveform, it does a bit of a brain fart when it comes to that transient. You cut it off and it recreates a bit of a faux peak. So clipping is essentially a way for us to cheat transients past the ceiling. When you oversample, you kind of regenerate that back in the digital realm. Now, the problem that you run into with that is, say that you're mastering to the absolute ceiling of 0 dBFS, full scale, you're getting overs over that 0 point now. You're getting all the meters reading red, everything is going crazy on you. So safe clip is simply a native sample rate clipper which follows the output, which chops that peak back off and keeps the meters very, very happy for you. Now bear in mind, because save clip is a clipper that operates at the native sample rate, it will actually reintroduce some of that aliasing that you fought off with the oversampling. This is just an inevitable effect of oversampling and clipping at the same time. If you want to have the best aliasing performance, you want to keep the save clip off. And adjust the output so that you leave enough headroom for those peaks to not actually reach the ceiling. This might take some trial and error, but if you're just stringent on the amount of aliasing that ends up in your audio, that's a good way to go about it. For everybody else, simply set the output where you want it. Let's say that you're mastering. A good place to have it is -0.1 dB. Turn the save clip on, set the level of oversampling that you want, let's say 64 times for absolutely no audible aliasing whatsoever, and Bob's your uncle. And now that we've gone over that, I'd just like to end this with a tip for my friends who actually plan to do mastering for a living or plan to actually use their ears rather than the meters. When I master with clippers, I turn oversampling off. There's a very, very simple reason for that, and you've actually already seen it. So that reason is that when I clip, I only tend to clip the highest peaks. I never clip the steady state signals if I can avoid it. So the aliasing is only happening in transient bursts, and it's only really affecting the kick and the snare, maybe the toms, any other kind of transient bursts in the material. The audible effect of the filtering that you have to do when you oversample, to me, has more of an audible effect on the audio than the sound of the transient aliasing on the actual transients. You can compare this for yourselves. It's very easy to switch between oversampling off to 128 times. As always, I prefer oversampling off for my personal workflow. You may disagree, and if you do, if you really go by the meters, if you really need everything to look good on the graphs, well, you now have 128 times oversampling in case you want to completely massacre your CPU. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that run through as much as you're sure to enjoy the new features of Flatline. If you haven't grabbed your copy yet, make sure to check the link down in the description to grab your free 7-day trial and give it a shot for yourself. For everybody else, hit that little subscribe button to stay up to date with future audio production videos over the coming weeks. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.